Hi everyone, Lisa Haven here, and have I got an amazing report lined up for you today, and one you guys are going to want to sit through the entire thing. I have on the broadcast with me today, Lee Stranahan. You guys are probably well aware of who he is, but he was a former writer for Breitbart and actually one of the lead reporters there, and very huge into investigative journalism. But he's gone on his own and he started Populist.tv. He has his own YouTube channel. I'm going to leave the link below for all you YouTube subscribers, so make sure you subscribe because he's got amazing stuff. Not only that, but he also has a website in which he teaches people some of his inside information, like what he does and how to be a journalist, and that's citizenjournalismschool.com. So I'm super stoked because we're going to talk about everything from the Russian investigation. We know James Comey literally had his hearing minutes ago, probably, still in some of that. But not only that, but we know, Donald Trump and George Soros is a big culprit of this. And I'm going to kind of let him take the reins on that. But amazing stuff. So don't flip the channel. Stay here on the YouTube channel, I will say, and because you're going to love it. So Lee, are you with me over there?
I sure am, Lisa. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So with that, let's just jump straight into it. What is going on with George Soros, Russia, and the investigation? I know you're putting together a documentary on that, so I'm excited.
Well, let's start with what happened today. Let's just start with the news, right, which is James Comey was testifying. And I'll tell you what happened at the hearing, but that the mainstream media, you could see it. If you were watching, you saw it. But the mainstream media is not talking about it, which is Comey was asked very early on what I think is the key question in this whole story about allegations of Russian hacking. Okay, so the key story is, and this is what I think people want to know, is did the Russians try to hack the election and hack the DNC, right? That's a pretty basic question. Well, he was asked whether the FBI ever examined the Democratic National Committee servers. And as he's testified before, he said, no, we never did. Now, let's just think about that for a second, Lisa. We're told this is an issue of national security, but Comey has testified at least 3 times now, twice I'm aware of in the Senate, including today, and in the House, that the DNC refused to allow the FBI to examine the servers. And that the only proof that we have, I'm doing air quotes, proof, is that comes from a group called CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike's a cybersecurity firm who was employed by the DNC. So imagine if you're a police officer, Lisa, and I have a business, and I say my business has been broken into. And you say, okay, well, I want to examine the premises to see what happened. And I'm like, no. And then I'm like, but I'm going to go fill out the insurance report. You'd be like, whoa, wait a second. So this is what Comey let the DNC get away with. And he's testified before. They asked multiple people at various levels for 10 months, and they were never allowed this. Now, how does this relate to George Soros? You'll see in a second, because CrowdStrike, for instance, CrowdStrike's a cybersecurity firm. They are based about a block and a half from where I live now in Virginia. My office here is about 2 blocks from the White House. But they're based in Virginia, in Arlington. And Dmitry Alperovich, who's the chief technical officer, who's the one who filed a report on this, and he is associated with a group called the Atlantic Council. Now, the Atlantic Council is a George Soros-funded group. We'll come back to that in a second. But let me talk about why this CrowdStrike thing is really significant. I'm going to take you back for just a quick second. Remember, Lisa, when Barack Obama, you remember him, right? So remember the end of last year, December 29th specifically, we threw out 37 Russian diplomats. Do you remember that? Where they made a big deal. They're like, we're throwing them out. They've hacked the election. Now, that happened December 29th. 1 week before that, CrowdStrike issued a report on December 22nd. And they said, look, We haven't quite nailed that it's the Russians yet until this report, but now we've got the goods. Russia, they said, CrowdStrike issued a report, and they said Russia hacked into Ukrainian tablets that were being used for artillery, big guns, okay? And they said, and because of that, 70% of the Ukrainian artillery was destroyed. And they used the same techniques they used to break into the DNC. Slam dunk, right? There's only one problem with that. According to the Ukraine, it never happened. So I'm going to say this again. CrowdStrike issues this report on December 22nd. Within 2 days, and by the way, it's reported all over the media. Go back and look for it. Type in CrowdStrike Ukraine report. You'll find it. And by the way, no one's retracted this story. NBC, Reuters, CNN, they all reported it. Then based in part on that report, a week later, the Obama administration throws out these Russians, okay? Now, January 6th, the Ukrainian government comes out on their official website and says, this never happened. Our artillery was not destroyed. There was no such hack. This never happened. You'd think that that would hurt the credibility of CrowdStrike, right? You'd think that that would sort of make CrowdStrike not look awesome, right? But 5 days later, January 11th, James Comey testifies in front of the Senate, and he has never pointed out one time that CrowdStrike issued a completely false report that now, by the way, CrowdStrike, about a month and a half, 2 months ago, they retracted the report themselves. That's really important to note. Now they've officially retracted it. Now, by the way, why don't I work for Breitbart anymore? Because I was in the White House in there every day wanting to ask a question, and I've been back to the White House a number of times since then, but at the time I was reporting for Breitbart, and I was going to ask Sean Spicer, because I'd just done this big report, how can the American people trust CrowdStrike? I would have worn my tie. I look pretty good when I'm in the White House, so I shave and everything like that. But no, it's true. So I was going to say, Sean, CrowdStrike's the only people who've examined the servers, and they recently were forced to retract their report that claimed this was the connective tissue between Russia and the DNC hacking. So the question, Sean, is how can the American people trust that we're getting valid information when the FBI never examined the servers themselves? Now, the reason I wanted to ask that question is because when you're in the press room, which is why I dress nicer, by the way, you got 4 million people watching you live. And I've watched this narrative develop. If you remember Roger Stone, the well-known operative, right? I'm the guy who, and they were talking about Roger was talking to Guccifer too. I'm the guy who got Roger into this story. I'm the one who called Roger. He didn't know anything about it last August, and I called Roger. I introduced him. I set up the discussions between him and Guccifer too, who I've also talked to. So I've been watching this story since the Democratic Convention last year, which I covered. So anyway, Breitbart, I was going to ask that question, and they said, well, we don't want you in the White House anymore. And so I said, well, I'm going to keep going to the White House. So it's a question of whether I work for you or not. And they said, well, no, we don't want you going. And I said, well, I'm going to keep going. And so they didn't fire me, and but I quit because I was just like, I'm not going to play that, because I was friends with Andrew Breitbart, and Andrew would have wanted me there. I'm 100% sure Andrew would have wanted me there. Andrew was a huge fan of my work, and I loved Andrew. And this is the kind of reporting that Breitbart should be doing. It's the kind of reporting that Andrew did. And by the way, it's the kind of reporting Steve Bannon wouldn't have. I'm friends with Steve. Steve wouldn't have wanted me. Steve would have wanted me there as well. So it was very irritating, but it's all worked out for the best. And I'm going to be back in the White House next week. You'll be able to see me over in the corner, and I'm going to keep trying to get on and ask this question, because it's the key question. Now, the other thing I found out is that when I started looking into all this, George Soros was everywhere. George Soros is, of course, the Hungarian billionaire financier. He's one of the main financiers for not just the Democrat Party, but also Hillary Clinton specifically. And this entire Russia story is a narrative that was started by Soros and Hillary Clinton back last year. And I can talk to you more about that in a second, but I've yapped on long enough there and hit you with stuff. But you start to get the idea that everything, there's no conjecture. Everything here, 100% confirmable. Anybody can look it up. You could show your most liberal friends, and they can't go, well, that's iffy. It's all just clear facts. These are the facts. The FBI never examined the server, and what we're watching right now is theater.
And, let me just add to that. I mean, I was watching the Comey hearing investigation there, and that question wasn't addressed, obviously, wasn't brought up. It wasn't even part of anybody's topic. And I kind of got the feeling, you have congressmen on either side of the table, if you will, but a lot of it was almost purposefully putting Donald Trump in a bad light. Like the questions were geared in that direction, and it's like, well, why don't we talk about the legalities of the memo for one? It wasn't classified, it wasn't done through, it was on his private own, and he technically, in my opinion, committed perjury, because prior to that, he had said that he didn't have any information on Donald Trump like this. He said it didn't happen, and then he said it did happen, and then he comes forward with this memo. But that wasn't addressed, it wasn't brought up, and I'm a little perturbed.
Well, let's tie this more into CrowdStrike. So the one of the co-founders of CrowdStrike is a guy named Sean Henry. Sean Henry is a former FBI agent. Okay? And here's the thing, CrowdStrike, people can look this up. About 3 weeks ago, they raised $100 million. So how would it have looked for that company? I'll put it like this. I just started a business. We just started the Populous TV and all this other stuff. What if in the major story the story I just covered, what if I got it completely wrong to the point where I had to retract it? That would kind of screw up my new business, right? Because I'm banking. Hi, I'm an investigative reporter. If you're a cybersecurity expert and you issue an official report that leads to government action and it's so wrong you have to retract it, that might hurt your IPO, right? It might hurt your money raising. So this has been hidden. It's been hidden. And James Comey.
Can I interrupt you real quick? The CrowdStrike retraction, you have a link or something for that?
Yeah, if you go to CrowdStrike's website, if you Google CrowdStrike Ukraine report, you'll see that they've issued a partial retraction on it.
Okay, and I am going to put that up on the screen for everybody so you guys can actually see that too. So. Yeah,
and I tell people all the time to Google stuff because I want them to just do their own research. It's like when you're a magician and you put the cards in somebody else's hand to do the trick. Does that make sense? There's nothing up my sleeves, right? I'm not sending you to a selective link. I'm saying to you, that's why we do citizen journalism school too. Really, the goal is to make people better consumers of news and also make them be able to put it out. And I'll tell you why. Andrew Breitbart thought this. Steve Bannon knew it too. We have a tougher road to hoe on our side. Okay? The media can get away with misreporting stuff. The mainstream media can misreport stuff all day and they're not held accountable. But Andrew Breitbart used to say, if we get one thing wrong, they're going to hammer us. And so my ethic, the way I approach things, because I got kids, I got kids, I got a wife and kids, and so I'm the money, I'm the income, and so I can't screw this up. You know what I mean? And so I always tell people, don't take the media's word, don't take Breitbart's word, and don't take my word. Don't take anybody's word. Look it up yourself, take the time, and I try to give people the resources to do that themselves. So,
I like that. And I like that you have that citizen journalism school because I would have liked to go through one. I'm self-taught as I go and looking up information, but it's so important that we get out there, we find the details, like exactly what you're doing, and you have done with George Soros, and you've exposed him on so many fronts. I know we were kind of having a conversation. How does he tie into all of this?
Well, he completely ties in. So two things. First off, you have to understand that Soros is really important, and I'm going to be talking about him, but he's only one of these big funders, okay? He's a super crucial one for reasons I'll discuss, but people are like, well, if we just get rid of George Soros, no.
Somebody else will come up.
Exactly right. That's like saying, if you I hate hamburgers, and if I could just close that McDonald's right there, it's like, well, dude, there's more hamburgers. So, but here's why Soros is important, okay? Now, again, this is not conjecture. This is according to his own words. George Soros has been funding these things that are called color revolutions. They're called color revolutions because they'll pick a color. So, for instance, in the Ukraine, it was the Orange Revolution, okay? And they pick a color. That's why they're called color revolutions. Now, here's what he does, and tell me if this sounds sort of familiar. Let's take the Ukraine as an example, okay? Because a lot of people don't know the situation. The mainstream media doesn't really explain it. In 2014, the president of the Ukraine, Yanukovych, was thrown out in essentially a bloodless coup. What I mean by that, it wasn't a military takeover, okay? It was millions of people in the public square, activist protesters, who wanted Yanukovych out, and he fled the country. Now, what led to that point? And what led to that point was George Soros, by his own admission, in an interview he did with Fareed Zakaria in 2014, right after Yanukovych left, you can find it on YouTube, said he'd spent $100 million. I'm not sure he mentions the number in the Fareed Zakaria thing, but he's mentioned it at other places. But he said, I've had groups in the Ukraine for years. Now, what were these groups doing? What did he spend $100 million on? He spent it on political activist groups, community organizers, teaching people protest. Okay? He spent it, and by the way, does any of this sound familiar? Perhaps you've heard of Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matter, also movements funded by Soros in this country, right? So what he did was he started teaching people the tools and technology of revolution, and he started getting multiple groups. And so one group would come out and protest because they'd get upset by another thing that had happened, right? And he was against Russia, because Russia was backing the government of the Ukraine at the time, and he was pro-European Union, okay? And they're called the Euromaidan protest. You can look them up, Euromaidan, not the heavy metal, not Iron Maiden. Totally different thing. But Euromaidan, right? The Euromaidan protest, and they were huge, right? Now, months before those protests happened, but by the way, he had help. Do you know who Soros had help from? You, Lisa. He had help from you. I assume you pay taxes, right? Let me tell you how your tax dollars went to work, okay? Hillary Clinton created a program called Civil Society 2.0. Again, look it up. Civil Society 2.0 was teaching revolution in places like the Ukraine. And you can look this up on YouTube. Look up Tech Camp, T-E-C-H camp, like band camp or right, like summer camp. Tech Camp. Tech Camp was funded with your tax dollars. You'll find a video from the Ukrainian embassy, our embassy, the U.S. embassy in the Ukraine, that they sponsored Tech Camp. And you'll also find what they were doing was they were teaching things like, this is literally true, at these tech camps they would teach, and they had them all over the world, in the United States, in Philadelphia, and other places. They teach things like a hackathon. I'm going to say that again, a hackathon. They would also show you cyber activism. They'd show you lessons from Occupy Wall Street, lessons from the Black Lives Matter movement. So what he did was he created this whole structure that eventually overthrew the government. Now, let's cut to January this year, this country, okay? I came out for the inauguration as a reporter to cover it. The next day after the inauguration, I'm in the streets, right in front of where my office is now, actually. There's 1 million people in the streets here. 1 million people. I'd never seen anything like it. Literally, you couldn't walk. Everywhere you went, there were protesters in pink hat. I'm not even going to say.
The angry women march.
It was the women's march, but there were 400 groups.
It got hijacked. It got hijacked. It's a horror. I don't know. What they're marching for isn't really women's rights, in my opinion. It had nothing to do with that.
And they don't even know what they're marching for, and they don't even know that Soros was funding all the groups. So what he's trying to do, and by the way, he was working with Hillary Clinton with these tech camps. And by the way, there's a Ukrainian minister who you'll find a speech from him on YouTube. He said they're trying to overthrow the government. And by the way, Russia has subsequently said that these color revolutions are a form of warfare, and that's why they have an arrest warrant out for George Soros. You follow me? Because they've realized this is a new way to destabilize a government, where a private individual, a billionaire, can go in and destabilize it. And what I'm saying is exactly the same thing is happening in this country right now. It's exactly what's happening in this country right now. He's funding it. He's not hiding that he's funding it. It's the same enemy. The bad guy's Russia again, right? And I ask people if they're, and by the way, I should mention, I have a radio show. It's on 5 days a week. It's on Russian. It's on Radio Sputnik. After I left Breitbart, I haven't changed any of my opinions. This Russian narrative is BS, so I'm not upset about working for Sputnik, but I'm just going to mention that because I should, because people go, well, I don't want people to go, well, he didn't mention that. But it doesn't change my opinion or my reporting in any way. But I would ask people, like, can you explain, like, I'm old, right? So I'm in my 50s. I grew up in the Reagan era, right? Back when the Russians were communist, and I don't like the communist Russians. But if you were to ask and I don't agree with everything Putin does, but it's not my country, right? But if you were to ask somebody, well, explain why Russia's so bad. Explain the threat of Russia to the United States. There just isn't one. I mean, I can explain the threat of ISIS to the U.S., right? I can explain the threat of Saudi Arabia to the U.S. Russia, it's just crickets, right? So that's what he's doing. And to understand this, the documentary we're working on, we're going to send a crew over to Europe. We're going to send a crew to the Ukraine, to Macedonia, which is where he's trying to do it right now. I've written stories about that at Breitbart, and they're linked over at populous.tv. But then we'll also talk about Arizona in a second, because I want people to understand he's operating at an international level, at a national level, and now at a local level too. People have again, Soros is a genius, and he understands how this stuff works. And so it's very, very interesting what he's doing. But it's one of the biggest untold stories right now. And when people see it, I don't care what your politics are, I really don't. The people who are marching in the streets don't, and by the way, let me say this too, because it's really important. You know why Soros does this? It's not some big ideological thing. He's making scratch on the whole deal. He's making money on the whole deal. He destabilizes currencies. He sets up these, he's admitted this. He says then he destroys the country, then comes in and helps them out, and he makes a profit. This is why I say, even if a liberal Democrat, they don't know they're doing this. They think they're doing it because they're in favor of peace and love and all that stuff, right? They're not trying to make a billionaire richer, but that's what they're doing. That's really what they're doing, bottom line. So,
and that's so true. Now we only have like a few minutes left because I gotta try to keep this shorter, but I totally want to bring you back on because I am intrigued by all of this, especially when you get that documentary underway, because I want to see it, I want to watch it, I want to help push it, promote it, because the more people that we can get this out to, the better. So with that, do you have any closing thoughts, information, and also reshare your links as well?
Sure. If people go to Populous.tv. I have a big story there about how Soros has been funding these local races, including there in Arizona. He defeated Sheriff Joe. I've got links to how he's done this in state after state after state. He got smart with his money. He realized in a local state's attorney race, he can put in 100,000 and completely change the criminal justice system. We have two big stories on that. CitizenJournalismSchool.com is the school there, and then YouTube. A lot of stuff's going through YouTube. We're greatly expanding the YouTube thing, and like I mentioned, we just got a studio space here in DC. So we're going to be doing multiple reports, stuff from the White House, stuff from in front, stuff from here in the studio. So we're going to start doing a lot of, look, it's the kind of investigative reporting I love doing, and that Andrew and Steve Bannon love me doing. And it's just a different format. Some written stuff, some research materials, but a lot of video coming. So.
Awesome. And I get a lot of questions on, how do you look through the information? How do you find the information? What do I do? So for those people who send me those emails, I direct you to, go to his citizenjournalismschool.com with that. So that would be my best advice, because I'm still, learning as I go. But also make sure you guys subscribe to his channel, because he's got amazing stuff. That's why I brought him on here. And so go check out his YouTube and subscribe there as well. You won't be disappointed. Well, anyhow, thank you guys. And thank you again, Lee, for coming on the broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Lisa. It's great to be on with you at any time.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely bring you back on. So.
Okay. Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks again for tuning in. This is Lisa Haven and Lee Stranahan signing out.